Good night, everyone. Tonight, God is good and God is good all the time. My name is Sermon Jazz Spirit Divine. I'm here to give you a word on tonight, and we're going to talk about David and this giant. You know, David is a little boy. And they're trying to find out who's going to fight this big old giant. And David said, I'll do it. I'll do it. I can tear him down. So 1 Samuel 17, verse 1 through 58. Now the Philistine is gathered, their forces for war. They're ready for war. And they're sent in Judah, and they pitched a camp between the two cities. And Saul and the Israelite assembly encamped in the valley throughout the battle line to meet the Philistine. At first they were scared, their ancestors, they ain't even want into the promised land because of this. And this giant, he about this tall. And that's why the Israelites, their ancestors, like the third generation, they ain't want into the promised land because of the tall people. So the Philistine gathered forces for Saul, and the Israelite assembly battle line to meet the Philistine. The Philistine occupied one hill and the Israelite another with the valley between them. Now we see both nations preparing for war. So a champion just gathered, this giant, who came out of the Philistine camp. Now his height is like 6 cubits long. Now we see this giant always between two nations. He always between two nations. Now this giant is with the Philistine. Now this is why the Israelites, their ancestors, who was in fear to enter the promised land because of this big old tall giant, who is 6 feet tall, six cubits tall. Now he had a bronze hammer, on his head. And he wore a coat, a scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 scales off his leg. He wore bronze cleaving and bronze. He just had a whole lot of stuff on. And he already tall. And, and so now Saul, the tallest of the Israelites. And remember, Saul is tall, of the Israelites. They may have been especially worrying because he was obviously the best match for the game. And see, they want Saul to fight. Saul tall, the giant's tall. They want Saul to fight. So now this giant, wants to fight with one of the Israelites. Shouting. I mean, this giant wants to fight. And he's shouting. Bring someone out for battle. This giant said, chose a man to come out. He ready to go to war. He just screaming and hollering, talking about he ready for war. Bring somebody out here. So the Philistine giant said, if he is able to fight and kill him, they will become the Israelite subject. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our substance and serve us. Now he making his rules. He ready to fight war. And this too powerful nation, Israel, in Philistine. So in our army often evolve, to high cost of a battle, by putting its strongest, warriors together, against the strongest warriors of the enemy. Now the winner of the fight, will consider the winner of the battle. So this giant has a definite advantage against David. He's tall. He's real tall. And David just a little boy right now. Now David from a human standpoint, but this giant didn't realize that in fighting David, he also had to fight God. And see, that's how David was an Israelite. That's why Israelite is powerful also, long as they have God on their side. When they fight against the Israelite, they got to fight against God. And see, this giant don't even know what he about to deal with. So the Philistine said, give me a man, let us fight each other. After hearing the Philistine, Saul and all the Israelites, they were dismayed and terrified. They're terrified. So now Saul and the Israelites still trying to find someone to fight this big old giant. Now David wants to fight, So David is going backwards and forward, David wants to fight. David, even though he a little boy, he works in the field and he go with animals and lions and bears, he kill animals. So if he can kill animals, you know what he can do with this giant. He pacing up and down, because he wants to fight. He coming around shouting and making all bring somebody out, So David's going backwards and forth, and from Saul. So now he want to talk to Saul. Now David is the father of Jesse. He have an oldest son, and he was trying to send out there and walk. So the oldest son really wants to go out there and fight too. 'Cause he tall also. That's the one that Samuel thought that God was going to choose for king because he was tall like Saul. So for 40 days, this big old giant, just pacing up and down, shouting, wants to fight somebody, ready to go to war. So 40 days, the Philistine came forward, every morning and evening, and take his stand. So for 40 days, he shout wants to fight somebody. He take his stand every morning, every evening, send somebody out. So now this went on for 40 days without one side attacking the other. Now while he doing all that, nobody sitting there attacking no one. And there was camp on the opposite side of the valley wall. The east side was waiting for the other to attack. They were waiting. Now each team waiting for someone to start first. You know how children do. I'm waiting for you to hit first. Now I'm waiting for you to hit first. And so for 40 days, nobody attacked no one. Because this one waiting for that one to strike, this one waiting for that one to strike. So Jesse, Jesse asked David, because the oldest son, he trying to be the oldest brother. So he wants to go and see if he can beat this big giant down. So Jesse asked David, why don't you go and check on your brother? Now remember David is the youngest, right? So they with Saul, fighting against the Philistine. So the older brother wants to be the oldest brother, and he wants to take down this giant. Now David had left and he to go see how his brother is doing, like his father said. So this giant had stepped out from his line, and shouted, as usual, So whatever the Israelite had saw the man, they all flee from him in great fear. So the Israelite had been saying, do you see how this man keep calling out? He come out to define Israel. So the king will give great wealth to the man who killed him. Now he will also give his daughter in marriage. So he said if the person that went, he would give his daughter to marry. And he would exempt his family from taxes, in Israel. So there are riches, whoever can beat this giant down, get a great gift. So David had asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who killed this Philistine and removed this disgrace from Israel. This Philistine is uncircumcised. Now see, David realized that this giant is uncircumcised. So he defining the army of the living God. Everyone supposed to be circumcised at 8 years old. So the Israelites saw only a giant, but David had saw a divine Almighty God. David said, you define Almighty God. You are uncircumcised. So I don't know how David know, but he specialized that he realized this big old giant is uncircumcised and trying to be around the Israelite. So this giant was a target. He was too big, to miss. And he knew, he would not be alone. And when he faced this giant, God will fight with him. So when David know if he fights this giant, he know he's not gonna be alone. He know God. He gonna be able to face this giant, and God will fight with him. And he look at this situation from God's point of view. Now he ain't look at his point of view. He look at it on God's point of view. So he has so much confidence in God, not in himself. He know if he go out there, he know God gonna fight for him. So they separate, to him what they had been, saying, and told him this is what would be done for the man who killed him. So when David, when David oldest brother, heard him speaking with this man, he burned with anger. Now, see, he mad because he the oldest brother. He wants to take care of this situation. But he see David came along. He hearing David talking to this giant. He hear him talking. And, because the father told him to go there and check on his brother. You know. And so, how the oldest child is. They wants to be in charge. They wants to try to handle everything. David the little brother, he wants you to go sit back somewhere or you go home. So he get angry because David, trying to take care of the situation. So he angry at him and he asked, why have you come down here? And he don't know that the father told him to go down there to check on him. And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? So I know how conceited that you are, and wicked that your heart is. Now you came down only to watch the battle. He gonna tell David, you came down here only to watch the battle. So now what I done, so David said, now what I done? He is so angry with David, so can I even speak? The brother just going on. He just so angry. So David said, can I speak? So he then turned away to someone else and brought up him as before. And so remember, David's father told him to go up there and check on his brother. But David didn't tell him that. He wants he the one low self his brotherhood. So he didn't tell him that our father, told me to come check up on you. So he just got angry when he go out there. He seen David talking to the giant, like he trying to handle the situation. So now David is trying to find out, why his brother is angry. So David is speaking with Saul. Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight for him. So David saying, talking to Saul. Okay, he said, don't let nobody else go out there and fight. He said, I can take care of it. I can fight this giant. So criticize, couldn't stop David. Because, the brother criticized. He called him deceitful person, he called him all kind of names, And so David, the criticizing could not stop David. So while the rest of the army stood around, he knew, to important or taking action. So with God, to fight for him, there was no reason to wait. He didn't want to waste no time. He ready to fight this giant. Now most of the time if somebody criticize you, remember they criticized Saul when he become to be king. And Saul was silent. But then the next thing, 2 days later, what Saul had to do? Saul had to rescue that same person that criticized him. So we see David being criticized by his own brother. But it didn't stop him. He still talked to Saul. And he asked, could he go out there and fight this army? Fight this Philistine? Now, people may try to discourage you, with negative comments. Like his oldest brother did. Or mock you. Or continue to do what you know is right. And that's how I am. They can laugh at me, they can mock at me, but when you doing the right thing and you working for God, you're gonna be like something. You're gonna be solid, and you're gonna continue on moving forward. And that's what David did. His own brother criticized him, but he still want to fight that giant. And he talked to Saul. He talked to Saul. So now he told Saul to let him fight this Philistine. And Saul said, you are not able. You ain't just a young boy, So David said, let me go fight this giant. So, Saul looking at him like, you're just a little boy. You ain't able to fight this big old giant. So David said he keep his father's sheep. He letting them know I work in the field. I keep my father's sheep together. And he killed the animals that's in the field. Killing the lions and the bears, and he had confidence in God. That he would kill this uncircumcised, Philistine. Now he will be just like a lion and a bear. Now he's saying, let me fight this giant, because I deal with animals in the yard, keeping my father's sheep and stuff. I kill lions and bears and stuff. So this Philistine will be just like a lion and a bear. That's what David said. He's going to be just like that lion and the bear. Just like he killed that lion and the bear, he'll do the same thing with this Philistine. So he will be just like a lion and a bear. And David said, the Lord who rescued him in that field, see, when he in that field and dealing with them animals, God be right there in that field with him. And God be protecting him. He be shutting the lions and the bears' mouth up like he did with Daniel. They in a place Daniel in that lion bit. God had sent this angel, and the angel shut that lion mouth up, and it had none other choice but to spit Daniel out. So the Lord who rescued me from the paw of a lion and a bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Now he said God had rescued him in that field with that lion and the bears and stuff. And he said he got confidence that God gonna do the same thing with this Philistine. So David explained this to Saul. Now he's explaining all this to Saul. Because Saul looking at him like, you just a boy. You talking about going out there and fight this big old giant? So now David had to explain to him, I work in the field. I kill lions and bears. I kill all kind of animals, in the field. With my hand, he don't use no weapon. All he uses his slingshot. He just used that, and to get the job done because God's power be working along with David. So Saul said to David, so David explained everything, to Saul. And he could take down this big giant. And we see that David is not worrying about this big giant. He know that God is always with him. Especially in that field. Dealing with the lions and the bear. Now he is with, he'll be with him with this lion. So David have confidence, confidence in God and not in him. He know he cannot beat all this stuff without God. Remember he said God was with me, in that field when the lions and the bears came against him. So now David preparing to fight for this giant. So Saul has said to David, you go ahead and let the Lord be with you. Because he had a connection with God too. So when he brought God's name in it, he said, you go ahead on and let the Lord be with you. So now David prepares to fight this giant. He prepares. So Saul trying to dress him. Now Saul putting all this heavy stuff all on him. Trying to dress him for what? So David looking around, like you putting all this stuff on me. So David got up, to see if he can walk around. He said, I can hardly walk in this stuff. So David took the stuff off. He took the stuff off. He said, all I need is some stones and my slingshot. He said, that's all I need. In the name of the Lord. He said, that's all I need. So Saul put all this stuff on him. A hammer on his head. All this stuff Saul, put on David was heavy. It was heavy. He couldn't hardly walk. Now Saul dressed David and he tried to walk around and he not used to this. He used to being in the field, with his slingshot. That's all he used. So David took all that stuff off and he not used to fighting with all this stuff on. So David chose 5 stones, and he put them in his little pouch, of his bag, with a slingshot, and this what he would use approaching his Philistine. That's the only thing he gonna use to approach his Philistine. So his confidence is in God. His confidence is in God. He have confidence and he have faith, that God gonna be with him to fight this battle. So now Saul dressed him, but David took all that stuff off. He said, I don't need all that stuff. He said, all I need is my stone and my slingshot. He said, that's all I need. So meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearing in front of him, he kept coming, this giant kept coming closer to David, So he looked at David. So the giant looked at David. And the giant saw that he just was a little boy, you know, glowing and handsome, and he was displeased with him. He was displeased because see, this giant ready to fight somebody, right? To fight somebody that close to his age, not his age, his height, So then, David come out there as a little boy, So this giant said, so the Philistine look at David. Now he saw that he was a little boy. He did saw that he was handsome, So the Philistine said, "You come at a dog." The Philistine told David, "You come at a dog." In other words, trying to tell him, "You stay in your lane. You can't handle none of this stuff here." So with the sticks, he said, "You come with me. You come at a dog with sticks." So the Philistine had cursed David, and he said, "I give you the flesh, to the birds." He said, "I give your flesh to the bird and the wild animal." So he think he gonna be David. He said when he beat David down, he gonna take his flesh and give it to the bird, and the wild animals. So David said, "You come against me with a sword and a spear." He said, but David said, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." So David let him know, "You coming at me with a weapon. I'm a little boy, but you come at me with a weapon. But I'm gonna come at you against with the Almighty God in the name of the Lord." That's what he said. In the name of the Lord, I'm gonna come at you with. So this day, he said, this day, the Lord will deliver him to him. Deliver you into my hands. And I strike you down. He said, "I'm gonna strike you down. I'm gonna cut your head off. And this very day, I will get a carcass, of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world would know that there is a God in Israel." God got to get his glory out of himself. And even David said that. David said, God gonna get the glory out of this. He told Saul that earlier. He said, God gonna get the glory out of this. He said, "I'm gonna go out there in the name of the Lord." Now the Philistine said, "You coming at me? You coming at this dog with some sticks?" So David said, "Well, you coming at me with a sword and weapons and stuff, but I'm coming against you in the name of the Lord." That's all David said he need. So in the name of the Lord, David stand against this giant, with the name of the Lord. Now as he defends, David's confidence, is understandable. When we look into the meaning behind these words, by calling on God's name, David is making appeal, to God honor, authority, and presence. So we have to call out on the name of the Lord. You call it authority, the present, and everything else. And so he called it, because he been anointed, since he still is a little boy. He is God Almighty that work, in putting out, the battle belongs to God. So David, he is a little boy. He know all this here, So David does not base his confidence on his own. This places his confidence in God. Power. When you call out his name. You call out his name, you have authority. You have authority in calling his name. His presence will arrive. And when God see that you place confidence in everything up in here, up in God and not in yourself, and see that's a mistake Moses had made. Instead of giving God glory and God and confidence in God, he put the confidence in himself. I'm about to give you some water. He didn't give God glory. He put all his confidence in himself that he can do this. We can't do nothing, without God power. You know, so the story still go on with David. You know, so all those had gathered here will know that it is not by the sword of the spear that the Lord saved. For the battle is the Lord, and He will give all of you into His hands. So they would know. So David said they would know. That the Lord saved and not the sword of the spear, for the battle is the Lord. In the mix of, any battle that we in, God gonna get glory because God said the battle belongs to Him. David going out there in that battle, but the battle not for David. The battle is for God. He going out there representing his body. But God gonna be doing the fighting in the war. So as the Philistine moved closer, to attack him, David ran quickly. He's a boy, so he got quick move. He moved quickly towards the battle line to meet him, reaching into his bag, and taking out the stone, and he slung it, and he struck the Philistine on the forehead, and it sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So this Philistine really thought he was going to beat David down. But all the while he fell down, face down on the ground. So David was able to move farther than this giant because David carried no heavy. See, David had, good thing he took all that stuff off that Saul tried to dress him with. He didn't have nothing on him but his little bag and his slingshot. So he was able to move quicker. So David was an expert marksman. He was an expert with that slingshot. Got him right in the middle of his forehead, with a slingshot, and he stayed out of range of the Goliath's huge weapon. Remember the giant, he had a huge weapon, and he had courage, he had faith in God, to fight, like David. We need David kind of fearless. Since David had no fear at all. He's a little boy and went out there against that big old giant. He ain't had no fear at all. So David, had grown strong in his confidence by trusting God. And when he had encountered, wild animals, wild God and his father's sheep, he had so much experience, So we see that David took the Philistine down with no weapon, but his slingshot, and got him in his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David trampled over the Philistine with a slingshot, without a weapon in his hand. He struck down the Philistine and killed him. He said he would. So David ran. He stood over. Remember, David said, when I kill you, I'm going to take your head off. And the Philistine thought he was talking out of his head because he was a little boy. So David ran and stood over this giant. Anybody else was scared. See, David is fearless. So he took a hold of the Philistine's sword, took his own weapon, and sliced his head off. And killed him. And he cut the head off with his own sword. And when the Philistine saw that their hero was see all the Philistines, when they saw that their big old hero was dead, that's when they turned and they ran back to their place. So we see that David, took the head, off the Philistine with his own weapon, and cut his head off. So then the men of Israel and Judah shout, pursued the Philistine. Pursued the Philistine. And so David took the Philistine head, took his head, brought it to Jerusalem, and put his weapon on his own tent. So Abner, the commander of the army, whose son is that young man. So they want to know, who is this young man? Let's see, here's a little boy. Who is this young man that brought down this big old giant? Who is he? So no, they want to know, who he is, as soon as David had returned, and brought him before Saul. With David still holding the Philistine head, he doing all this talking to Saul and this other king, and he's still holding the Philistine head in his hand. So we see this king was pleased with David that he brought him from Saul. So he was so pleased with David and took that giant down. So he purchased David from Saul. So whose son? Whose son? All this. Who who this young man? So Saul asked him, so see, Saul don't know too much about David either. All he knows that so David played the music, make his evil stuff calm down. He still don't know that David been secretly anointed, to take his spot. So David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse. So he tell him who his daddy is. So although David had played to her the music many times in front of Saul, but Saul questioned to this king seemed to show that he didn't know David very well. See, he didn't know that David can kill animals and tear the big old giant down. All he know that David can play this music and make his little evil spirit go away. So now he trying to figure out. Now he about to find out that he been anointed by Samuel. So he trying to find out. I don't know him too well. Look, he doing all this here. He been with me for a while, but I still don't know who this one person is. I need to check up on his father and find out more about his father in this boy right here. So it seemed to show that he didn't know David very well. So now David beat down this giant. So he beat down his giant. So he's scheduled to marry Saul's daughter. Remember, whoever beat this giant down, can marry, Saul's daughter. So Saul wanted to know more about his family. For this little boy to beat down this giant, I need to know more about him. So Saul wants to know about David's family. He still don't know that Samuel had anointed David. So we see that David, had asked Saul, could I beat this giant down? So David Saul looking at him like, you was a little boy, you're not able to do this here. So then David had to tell him the story that I be in the field. I be in my father's field taking care of the sheep and donkeys and all this kind of stuff. I had to kill bears and lions and everything with the name of the Lord with me. So he had to tell them all that. So he said, go ahead. And then Saul tried to dress him with all that stuff. David couldn't hardly walk. He took all that stuff off. He said, I don't need to, I ain't used to all this stuff, fighting and stuff. So he took all that stuff off. He said, all I need is my stone, my slingshot, that all I need in the name of the Lord. So he go out there with confidence in God, and this giant gonna talk about you coming against me with some sticks, So David said, you coming against me with weapon, I'm gonna come against you in the name of the Lord. So he's talking about, when I beat you down, I'm taking your flesh. I'm going to let the birds eat it and everything else. But then David will wind up beat him down. Took his own weapon and took his head off. And said he's going to bring it to Jerusalem. Just like he said. So we see that no matter how big your giant is, we have to remember how big our God is. So David went out there with confidence in God. He didn't look at how big the giant is. When David in that field, he don't look how big that bear is. He don't look how big that lion is. He look how big how my God is. He said, in the name of God, in the name of the Lord, I'm gonna beat you down. I could beat the lions and the bears. What you think I could do to you? See, David look at our mighty God. Look at the power, how God protect him. And he said, anytime he can deal and tear down a bear and lions with my mighty God, delivering them to him and fighting this battle, he knew he could go out there and break this big old giant. God, David put so much confidence and faith in God. And it worked every time. We all have to learn. I'm talking to myself too. We all have to learn that no matter how big our enemy is, no matter how big our situation is, we have to remember that we got a mighty God. He didn't look at how big that giant is. He looked at how big our God is. And that's how we have to do. We have to remember how big our God is. No matter how big our enemy is, how big, this giant is. No matter how big our situation is. We got to we got a big old mighty God. The battle belongs to him. And he'll help. He'll tear down anything that come in our way once we put our confidence in him. So that's all the word I have for you on today. And I love that we finally got into David. So it's gonna be very interesting to keep reading on with David and Saul. So we saw how Saul started out. He started out in the field looking for his donkey. We see how David started out, working in the field also. With the sheep and lions and bears and all this kind of stuff. So both of them have the same kind of skills. you know, both of them is good, but once, Saul had watched the whole battle. You see what I'm saying? Now Saul about to start getting jealous. He digging and diving in his family history now. I need to know more about this here. So he gonna get jealous. He really gonna get jealous when he found out that God had anointed this boy right here, and you got the same person living right under your roof. Sometimes you have your enemy right under your nose a lot of time and you don't even know. Now he got his, Samuel already had told, God got your next door neighbor, to be the king over Israel. But by David being a little boy, he don't pay that no mind. He don't think it's David. But when he watched that fight. He watched that fight. He see the skills that David had. He saw how David was moving around. They said he was quick. He was moving around. That giant couldn't move around. David was trying to stay away from that giant weapon. He had a big old sword swinging like this, and David was moving around. And see, Saul watching. We watching and seeing the skills that David have. So now he want to look into his family. Who is this boy? I really don't know him very well. And he really gonna get jealous when he really find out who David really is, and that's the person he had right under his nose. So y'all have a blessed night, and remember, don't never be scared of your giant. Always remember, we have a big giant, a mighty God. So y'all have a blessed night, and I'll see y'all on the next video.